All right, let's jump right into this. Imagine a scenario where a business does exactly what it's supposed to do, right? It adopts a groundbreaking new technology, saves a ton of money, and absolutely boosts its bottom line. Sounds like a total win. But what if I told you that this exact same action, when you multiply it across thousands of businesses, could accidentally damage the entire national economy? Welcome to This Explainer, where today we're unpacking what is basically the ultimate AI paradox: cost-cutting versus the economy.
And look, we're not just talking about abstract whiteboard economics here. 7 in 10. Recent research shows that 7 out of every 10 workers are genuinely worried about their jobs because of the rise of AI. That's a massive chunk of the workforce feeling real, palpable anxiety about their livelihoods today. So we aren't talking about some distant sci-fi future. We are talking about conversations happening at kitchen tables right now.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll look at the baseline reality. Then, we'll get into the cost-cutting paradox. Third, the threat to GDP. Fourth, cost-cutting versus growth-enabling. And finally, we'll wrap up with the policy puzzle.
Okay, kicking things off with Section 1, the baseline reality and the AI job anxiety. Let's ground this with a real story. Meet Richard. Richard is a recent computer science grad, and he did everything right. Got the degree, built up the technical skills, but he recently applied for over 150 software engineering roles only to hit a total brick wall. Why? Because companies are already using AI tools to handle basic entry-level coding tasks. That critical first rung of the career ladder is just becoming insanely competitive, and in some places, it's practically vanishing.
And Richard's situation isn't an isolated incident. Since the launch of ChatGPT, we've seen a 16% decline in entry-level jobs and a pretty staggering 28% decline in graduate jobs just in the past year. Some experts are even predicting a 20 to 30% unemployment rate in specific sectors within the next 2 to 3 years. So while long-term tech predictions are notoriously hard to get right, this transition gap, the reality on the ground today, is causing a genuine collapse in the job market for younger folks.
Moving right along to Section 2, the cost-cutting paradox, or micro versus macro. This right here frames the core economic tension of our explainer. It's a brilliant paradox highlighted by AI commentator Mo Gaudat. At the micro level, so for an individual business, it makes sense to replace headcount with AI. You quickly save money, reduce costs, and suddenly your quarterly profits look amazing. But zoom out to the macro level. If every single business across the country does this, what happens? You completely wipe out purchasing power. Unemployed people simply don't have the income to buy the very products those businesses are trying to sell. So an action that makes total logical sense for one company becomes disastrous for the broader country. You literally kill the consumption side of the GDP. Which brings us to Section 3, the threat to GDP and the tax revenue puzzle. Let's expand this macro perspective even further to the government level. If people aren't working, who pays the taxes? This is the multi-trillion-dollar question raised in our source panel. Our whole society, public infrastructure, healthcare, it's predominantly funded by income tax. If mass layoffs happen just to boost corporate margins, that tax base shrinks, and that leads to a severe existential threat to national stability and public services. And this gets even more alarming when you look at specific trends. Take the UK economy, for instance. It's 80% services, which is the exact sector most vulnerable to large language models. We're already seeing huge shifts. Standard Chartered cutting 8,000 jobs. BT predicting 55,000 fewer employees by the end of the decade. Amazon cutting 14,000 jobs. Now combine those mass displacements with an aging population that's demanding more public services, not fewer. The math just doesn't add up. You simply cannot fund an aging society if your service sector is decimated.
Let's shift our focus a bit to Section 4, cost-cutting versus growth-enabling, and look at 2 AI philosophies.
Now, it isn't all doom and gloom. Not all business leaders look at AI as just a giant digital pair of scissors to shrink headcount. We basically have 2 competing philosophies. The first is AI to replace, using it purely to save costs and do the exact same work with fewer humans. As we've seen, the result there is job displacement and a broken consumer economy. But the second philosophy is AI to augment. Tech founder Victor argues that great companies today are made of great people, and in 10 years, great companies will still be made of great people. The goal here is to empower humans to experiment and build entirely new products, which creates new opportunities and actually increases the value of human connection.
And that brings up a fantastic insight from a business owner named Charles, who noted, "We are very bad at predicting, but we're very good at experimenting." And it's so true.
Right now, AI is in this massive, highly expensive experimentation phase. Actually, for a lot of companies, it's adding costs today rather than reducing them because they're testing out vast amounts of AI trying to find new opportunities. They aren't just blindly slashing jobs, they're actively searching for what new value they can create.
Which leads perfectly into this fascinating scarcity principle from the sources. Think about it. Historically, what was scarce and highly valued? Analytical jobs, crunching numbers, coding, software development. But as AI makes those technical skills totally abundant and cheap, what becomes the new premium? The future of scarcity is in genuine human relations, creativity, and authentic connection. Once AI is handling all the basic logistics, like, say, tracking a package, the value of a consumer actually getting to talk to a real, empathetic human is going to absolutely skyrocket.
All right, bringing us to our final part, Section 5, the policy puzzle and the political debate.
So, how do our leaders actually suggest we solve this huge macroeconomic riddle? Let's objectively look at the different political approaches proposed in our sources, starting with the labor perspective. Politicians like Darren emphasize a really heavy focus on training and skills to prepare young people for this new economy. They argue strongly for protecting workers' employment rights during what's going to be a chaotic transition. A massive priority for them is making sure the wealth generated by AI actually stays within the domestic economy, preventing it from just being extracted by US tech giants. And finally, they want to digitize public services, like rolling out a gov.uk app to deliver better outcomes at lower costs. On the flip side, we have the conservative counter-perspective, articulated by commentators like Julia. This argument points out that the early productivity gains of AI, they're actually pretty mixed so far, and the cost of the tech tokens to run these models is rising fast. From this viewpoint, current government policies, like increased national insurance, already make employing humans too expensive and way too complex. So their solution is to focus heavily on reducing regulatory friction to make sure the country stays globally competitive. The priority here is giving companies the agile tools they need to win the race, with a warning that heavy regulations might actually deter businesses from hiring young people altogether.
But despite these deeply differing political solutions, the source material drives toward one really powerful consensus point. As one panelist put it, Britain will either rise or fall if we get this right or wrong, so we need to get beyond the traditional political bickering. The stakes for the national economy and, honestly, our collective future are literally existential. Whether a nation leans into worker protections or deregulation, everyone basically agrees that failing to manage this macro-level transition is just not an option.
Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to wrap up today's explainer. Will AI be used merely to cut costs, boosting those short-term business margins while slowly wiping out the purchasing power of the broader economy? Or will businesses and governments choose a path that uses this incredible tech to launch a totally new era of human-augmented growth? The choice between those two paths is going to define the next decade. Thank you so much for exploring this with me, and I'll leave you to think about which path we're ultimately going to choose.